All right, so today we are learning the very basics of percussion notation. We're going to be taking this block of what seems to be like hieroglyphs at first glance and breaking it down into something a little bit more comprehensible. So, let's dig in. Okay, this is what we are dealing with today. One single bar of percussion notation, which may seem a little daunting at first glance, but this breaks down into just a few essential components. The clef, time signature, our notes, which will vary, and the bar line. In this case, there's only one measure, so the second thicker bar at the end just denotes the end of the score. If you've seen any scores or notation before, this probably looks a little different than what you're used to. This is a full staff. 5 bars, 4 lines, time signature, key signature, and the clef right here. What we're looking at today is actually pretty similar, just without some of this flair. There's no key signature, and we're only working with a single line. So let's start breaking down what these different components are. These two vertical lines here all the way to the left are your clef. This denotes unpitched percussion in particular. You'll see this for instruments like snare drum, bass drum, the drum set, and so on. And to the right of that is our time signature, these two 4s stacked on top of one another. So what do these mean? The top 4 is telling us that there are 4 beats in our measure. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, they're all there. And the bottom 4 is a little less intuitive. It means that the quarter note is the beat. We haven't gone over the types of notes just yet, so you'll have to take my word for it that these are in fact quarter notes. So 4 quarter notes and the quarter note is the beat. Great. You might also see this time signature as just a C, like this. This stands for common time, which is exactly the same thing as 4/4. Just keep that in mind. So just to the right of that are our 4 quarter notes, which we will get to in just a moment. And lastly, this piece here at the end is telling us that we've arrived at the end of the score. If there were multiple measures, there would be a bar line in between them, like this, showing us where one bar ends and the other begins. So those are all of our components. We've got them all down. So let's start talking about the different types of notes. So we're going to backtrack from the quarter notes for a minute and plot down this whole note right at the beginning of the bar. This real imposing beefy dude here. All right. So we mentioned earlier that our time signature tells us that there are 4 beats in a measure and that the quarter note is the beat. This whole note takes up the space of 4 quarter notes. So in this case, where the quarter note is the beat, the whole note takes up the entire measure. This is a long, sustained note. And actually, this is probably a good opportunity to talk about what longer notes mean in percussion. Other instruments, like woodwinds, brass, strings, piano, would sustain this whole note, meaning they would play whatever note it was, the whole note, for the entire 4 beats. But that's kind of hard to do with percussion because we hit our drum head and that's kind of that. We can't really sustain a note in that sense. So what the whole note is telling us to do is to stroke on one and then feel the space in between and then on to our next note. And this sort of hints at our job as a drummer and percussionist. Without getting too heady or esoteric, we're essentially providing the time, the pulse for the music. So having a good sense of where our notes are and the space in between them is actually really important to our role. Okay, so we have this whole note that takes up 4 beats. If we were to split this whole note in half, we would get 2 half notes. This is our first subdivision. half notes are a subdivision of a whole note. When you divide a whole note equally, you get 2 half notes. So these take up exactly half the space of the whole note. Whereas the whole note takes up the space of 4 beats, these half notes take up the space of 2 beats each. And because of that, there's space for 2 of them in each measure. So this first one here occupies the space of 1 and 2, and the second half note, the space of 3 and 4. Again, just keeping in mind the space between these notes. So this brings us to the last kind of note that we're going to talk about today, one that we've seen already actually, the quarter note. So again, we divide these half notes in half, and we get 2 quarter notes from each, occupying the space of 1 beat each, a note falling on all of our beats here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just one more consideration about the space in between notes. All of our beats have an even amount of space in between them, which can potentially be a difficult concept to grasp if you're just starting out. So when I'm trying to even out my tempo when I'm playing, I like to picture myself taking like a leisurely stroll down a nice, flat, even road. Evenly paced, each step comes down with the same amount of space in between as the last. I'm not speeding up or slowing down, just nice and even. If I were to translate that feeling to counting my measure here, it would sound something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, instead of kind of staggered like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You get it. So remember, nice leisurely stroll down the road, not staggering home from a night out on the town. So hopefully we've demystified reading notation a bit for you, and you're walking away from this even that much more confident in your ability to read music. And just one little plug before we call it here. If you feel like my teaching style works for you, I am currently taking on new private lesson students. So if you're in the Western Mass area, I teach in the studio here, and if you're further away, I do online as well. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all again for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.